The man I turned to in my darkest hour laid out a deal I could not have imagined in my wildest nightmares. We met at a Panera Bread off the Merritt Parkway, a sterile, unremarkable place where the lunchtime rush of soccer moms and business consultants would swallow us whole. He arrived right on time, as if he knew I was already cornered, even if I had not admitted it to myself. Daniel was dressed in a tailored suit that whispered money, his demeanor radiating a calm, predatory confidence. I was already at a small table in the back, trying to force my hands to stop trembling around my lukewarm coffee. A Category 5 hurricane was tearing through my insides, but on the surface, I was a placid lake. He sat across from me, ordered a black coffee without even looking at the menu, and fixed his gaze on me. "Grace." His voice was low, cutting through the chatter. "Let's not pretend you do not know how serious this is. I've offered you a lifeline. The only one you going to get." I said nothing, staring at the white knuckles of my clenched hands. 14 years. 14 years I'd been married to Chris. We'd built a life here in Greenwich, a home. I'd never even looked at another man. My brain felt like it was turning to cement, refusing to process what was happening. A week ago, I was just staring at a mountain of credit card debt and a foreclosure notice. Now I was being offered a deal that would detonate my life and incinerate everything I held dear. But the terror was paralyzing, and I knew my back was against the wall. What would it entail? My voice was a treacherous whisper, but I had to ask. Daniel leaned forward, creating a bubble of conspiracy around our table. His eyes were like polished steel. "This is just a transaction, Grace. No strings attached. Completely confidential. You get your money, and I get what I am owed. Be fast and clean." He enunciated the last words, as if to assure me there was nothing sordid about it. "I need to think about it," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. A faint, knowing smile touched Daniel's lips. He was sure of his victory. He leaned back, took a slow sip of his coffee, and slid a heavy, linen stock business card across the table. "You have 24 hours, he said, rising from his chair. "I know you'll make the right choice." After he left, I sat there for a long time, the noise of the cafe fading to a dull roar. The business card on the table was a stark reminder of the dead end I'd reached. With trembling fingers, I slipped it into my purse, as if hiding it from view could hide the reality of my situation. The rest of the evening was a blur. I went through the motions on autopilot, heating up a Trader Joe's lasagna, wiping down the granite countertops, quizzing Ethan on his spelling words. Chris got home late from the city, exhausted from the commute, but he still gave me that familiar kiss on the cheek and mumbled something about a tough day at the firm. I barely heard him, my mind still replaying the conversation in the Panera. Daniel's presence was a shadow clinging to my thoughts. That night, I tossed and turned, the sheets twisting around me. My mind kept circling back to the cafe, to Daniel calmly and confidently laying out his terms. He wanted me to sleep with him to erase a zero from the debt. Over and over, I scrambled for another way out, but every path led to the same brick wall. I needed the money now, and my options had evaporated. The next morning, after the school bus picked up Ethan and Chris left for the train station in his Ford Explorer, I picked up my iPhone. My heart hammered against my ribs, so loud I was sure the whole empty house could hear it. I keyed in the number a few times before my thumb would obey, hovering over the green call icon. The fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach, but the thought of doing nothing was even more terrifying. Finally, gritting my teeth, I pressed send. "Yes, Grace." Daniel's voice was as smooth and unbothered as it had been in the cafe. I'll do it," I whispered, choking back a sob. "Good," was his clipped reply. "Tonight, I'll text you the details. It will be exactly as I said." He gave me a time and a place, and I numbly scribbled them onto a post-it note. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the wall. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, a storm raging inside me. I had just made a decision that would change everything. But in that moment it felt like the only choice I had. The day passed in a haze. Every action was mechanical, every thought consumed by the evening that was approaching with a terrifying, locomotive inevitability. I tried not to think about the details about what would happen. I just knew I had to go through with it. Otherwise, the perfect life Chris and I had built, the life Ethan knew, would crumble to dust. When evening came, I dressed in a simple black dress, as if I were going to a business dinner. Chris was home, reading briefs in his study. I told him I had a last-minute project meeting across town. He just nodded, his eyes not leaving the page. The ease with which the lie slipped out was its own kind of warning, but it was too late to turn back. I pulled my Chevrolet Tahoe into the parking lot of the designated meeting place, a generic Marriott courtyard off the highway, the kind of anonymous place business travelers use for one-night stays. My insides turned to ice. I walked into the lobby, took the elevator to the 5th floor, and found the room number Daniel had texted me. The door was slightly ajar. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. Daniel was there, just as calm and composed as ever. He gave me a short nod, gesturing toward a chair by the window. "It'll be quick, Grace. You'll be fine." I did not answer. In that moment, I was not a person. I was a puppet, my strings being pulled by forces I could not control. Time seemed to warp, to slow down and lose all meaning. It was a nightmare you could not wake up from. When it was over, Daniel silently left a folded piece of paper on the nightstand. A printout from his bank showing the updated loan balance, the interest slashed. He left without another word. I remained in the room, hollowed out. I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen, the face of a woman I no longer recognized. I stood there for a long time, trying to understand what I had become. It all started with one call. With shaking hands, I dialed the number a friend had given me with a grave warning. "Be careful, Grace. This guy, he's not a bank. He plays by a different set of rules." Daniel had answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting me. His voice was calm, almost cold, laced with the certainty of a man who held all the cards. "I am listening," he said, skipping any pretense of a greeting. I need to talk to someone," I stammered, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "Meet me tomorrow, noon, the diner on Maple Avenue." His tone was all business, no room for emotion. "Be there." He hung up, leaving me in a deafening silence. No questions, no details. He just assumed I would show. And now I had no choice. The next day, I was a bundle of raw nerves. The morning routine was a fog. Pouring cereal, packing Ethan's lunchbox, waving goodbye to Chris. He seemed oblivious, which was unusual. He was normally so tuned in to my moods. I tried to tell myself it was just a meeting, just another Tuesday. But the thought of Daniel was a constant, heavy presence. When I walked into the diner, the smell of coffee and grease hitting me, Daniel was already there. He was in a booth by the window watching the door. He had that unmistakable air of a man who owned every room he walked into. He wore a crisp dress shirt, no tie, and an Omega watch that glinted under the fluorescent lights. I slid into the booth across from him. He looked up, and his eyes held an unnerving mix of detached curiosity and a faint smirk. He gestured for me to order, but I just shook my head. My throat was too tight to speak. "So you're in a tough spot," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. It was not a question. "Yes," I whispered, studying the salt shaker on the table. "How tough?" I named a figure that felt like admitting defeat, a number that would make most people choke on their coffee. Daniel just gave a slight, thoughtful nod. His gaze was unervingly perceptive, as if he were taking inventory of my soul. "I can help," he said, letting the words hang in the air. "But you have to understand. My help comes with conditions." "What do you mean?" I asked, though a cold dread was already creeping up my spine. Daniel leaned in, his voice dropping lower, more insistent. "You'll have certain obligations. This would not be a simple loan." I tensed, the anxiety inside me coiling into a tight knot. Something in his tone, in the deliberate way he spoke, made me feel like I was standing on a cliff edge. But I could not back down. There was too much on the line. "I am ready," I heard myself say, not entirely sure I meant it. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Daniel's face before he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "We'll meet again to discuss the specifics. But remember, Grace, this is not just a business deal. You need to be prepared for the fallout." His words sent a chill through me. He was being vague, but I knew his offer would go far beyond any loan agreement. A storm of fear and desperation raged inside me, but also a strange, terrifying sense of inevitability. I was already in too deep. He pulled another one of his heavy business cards from his wallet and placed it in front of me. "My cell. We'll be in touch. Now go home, Grace, and think about what's really important to you." I took the card without a word, got up, and walked out, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way. The cool autumn air hit me like a slap in the face. The world outside seemed painfully bright, too real after the conversation that had just taken place. On the drive home, I tried to make sense of it all, but my thoughts just crashed against a wall of panic. Daniel was offering me a way out, but at what price? And was I really willing to pay it to save our lifestyle? The questions tormented me all evening as I sat alone in the quiet house, searching for answers that did not exist. By the time night fell over our perfectly manicured lawn, I knew there was no turning back. I had accepted Daniel's challenge, and now I would have to play by his rules, whatever they were. A few days passed, but I could not shake the memory of that meeting with Daniel. His words, his penetrating gaze, they were shadows I could not outrun. I was standing on a precipice, looking down at the wreckage of the life I knew, and the only way forward was to jump. One evening, while Chris was stuck on a late train from Grand Central, I was alone in the cavernous silence of our house. Ethan was asleep upstairs, his breathing soft and even over the baby monitor. In the quiet, my own heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had to decide. I had to know what Daniel's terms were, but the fear of what he would ask was a physical weight pinning me down. Then my phone buzzed on the kitchen island. A text from an unknown number. My stomach plummeted. It was him. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the Hyatt Regency in Stamford, room 312. We'll discuss the details then. He did not leave room for questions or argument. I stared at the screen, at the glowing blue text that felt like a summons. Tomorrow. The word echoed in my head, sealing my fate. The next day was a waking dream. I tried to focus on my routine, the gym, a trip to Whole Foods, picking up the dry cleaning, but every action felt hollow, meaningless. It was as if my real life had been put on pause, waiting for the moment I would see Daniel again. That evening, I got ready with deliberate care. I chose a simple, elegant sheath dress from Theory, something that projected a confidence I did not feel. When I came downstairs, Chris was in the living room, scrolling through emails on his laptop. I told him I had a last-minute networking event in the city. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. The guilt was a sharp, quick jab, but it was immediately swallowed by the tidal wave of anxiety that was pulling me under. I parked my Tahoe in the hotel's sprawling parking garage. Standing at the entrance, I looked up at the impersonal glass tower rising against the darkening sky. Felt alien, hostile. A voice screamed in my head that I was making a catastrophic mistake, but I pushed it down. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. Daniel was waiting for me in room 312. When I entered, he met me with that same unnerving calm and gestured to an armchair. The room was standard corporate luxury. King-sized bed, generic art, a view of the interstate, but it was cold and formal. This was not a place for comfort. It was a boardroom for a negotiation that would define the rest of my life. "Grace, I am glad you came," he began as I sat. "I understand you nervous. That's natural. All I am doing is offering you a way to solve your problems. The only question is how far you willing to go." His words were smooth, almost reasonable, but a hornet's nest of panic was buzzing in my chest. I could barely focus on his voice. "What exactly are you proposing?" I finally managed, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious, attentive. "I am offering you a non-standard repayment structure. The bottom line is, it requires absolute discretion. No one will know. I can guarantee complete anonymity." A lead weight settled in my stomach. I knew this was coming, but hearing the cold, clinical euphemism made it terrifyingly real. "And if I say no?" I asked, the words feeling futile. "Then, Grace, you will have to find another way to cover your debts. And let us be realistic. I do not think you have another way." His voice was firm, not threatening, just stating a brutal fact. I froze, torn between terror and the crushing weight of necessity. I tried to imagine living with the knowledge of what I was about to do. But the thought of losing everything, Chris, Ethan, our home, our future, was infinitely worse. It was all built on a foundation of lies, and now it felt too fragile to risk. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It was the sound of surrender. Daniel nodded, a flicker of confirmation in his eyes. "We'll meet a few times. Nothing complicated. Nothing that can harm you. It all stays between us. I'll provide the specifics later, but trust me, it will be very straightforward." His words were meant to be reassuring, but I felt like I was making a deal with the devil. The anxiety was a wildfire inside me, but I was powerless to stop it. All I could do was hope I would not be burned to ash. When the meeting was over, Daniel stood and offered me his hand. I shook it mechanically, his grip cool and firm. He walked me to the door. "Grace," he said, his voice low, "remember, my number is in your phone. Any questions, any doubts, you call me. We'll handle this together." I nodded, unable to speak, and slipped out of the room. I leaned against the wall in the empty hallway, trying to breathe. It all felt unreal. I was standing at the edge of an abyss, and I had just taken the final step. Driving away from the hotel, with the city lights blurring past my window, I felt a cold wind whip through the car. The chaos inside me had settled into a grim certainty. I had walked into Daniel's world, and now I had to figure out how not to drown. It's been a few weeks since I crossed that line. The meetings with Daniel became a surreal new reality, but on the surface, nothing changed. Every morning, I woke up in our beautiful colonial home, where life was so perfect it felt staged. Chris was still Chris, caring, attentive, and completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I'd become a master at hiding my turmoil behind a mask of suburban tranquility. Ethan was still our happy, carefree little boy. His world was untouched, and that was the only thing that gave me the strength to get out of bed. But inside I was fracturing. Every time I looked at Chris, the weight of my deceit pressed down on me. Every time Ethan hugged me, something inside me broke a little more. How could I betray them like this, all to maintain a lifestyle to keep up appearances? The morning started, as always, with coffee from the Keurig and the hum of the dishwasher. I clung to these rituals, these anchors of normalcy. Chris left for the train, kissing me goodbye, and I was left alone in the quiet house. I drove downtown to Greenwich Avenue. I could not shake the old habits. I found myself wandering past the boutiques where I'd once spent thousands without a second thought. I knew I could not afford it, but the pull was magnetic. In the window of a small, exclusive shop, I saw a stunning dress that would be perfect for the hospital charity gala Chris and I had tickets for. My hand was on the polished brass handle before I could stop myself. No, you see not. I could not justify another expense, not now. But a bitter voice inside me screamed that I deserved it. That after everything I'd been through, I was entitled to one small piece of beauty. My resolve crumbled, and I walked in. The sales associate recognized me instantly, her smile warm and familiar. "Grace, so good to see you. We just got our new fall collection in. Can I show you anything?" I nodded, desperate to feel like my old self again, the woman who belonged in this world. In the plush quiet of the fitting room, I slipped the dress on. It fit perfectly, a whisper of silk against my skin. For a moment, looking in the three-way mirror, I saw the woman I used to be. But then the illusion shattered. I saw a stranger staring back at me. A woman leading a double life, hiding a rotten secret behind a flawless facade. This dress was not just a dress. It was a symbol of everything I could not let go of, and a reminder of how far I had fallen to keep it. I took it off, put it back on the hanger, and handed it to the disappointed associate. Leaving the store, I felt a strange sense of relief. I could still control this, at least. I could still say no, even if it was just to a dress. Later, I met friends for lunch. We sat at an outdoor cafe, talking about summer plans for the Hamptons, the nightmare of private school admissions, and the latest gossip from the country club. I played my part, laughing at the right moments, but it all felt hollow, like watching a movie of my own life. When I got home, Chris was already there, unpacking takeout from our favorite Italian place. He was in a great mood, talking about planning a weekend trip to Vermont to see the fall foliage. I watched him in the kitchen, his easy smile, the way he moved with such unburdened confidence, and I realized how much I missed this. The simple, honest connection between us. He was right beside me, but we were a million miles apart. After dinner, we sat on the couch and he talked about his day. I smiled and nodded, but an icy dread was spreading through me. Everything looked so perfect, but it was all an illusion. How long could I keep this up before he saw the cracks? When Ethan was in bed, Chris suggested a movie, but I told him I was tired. He kissed my cheek and went into the family room. I lay alone in our dark bedroom, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing down, suffocating me. I was trapped in a prison of my own making. The meetings, the money, the lies, it was a part of me now. And the things I had fought so hard to keep, the house, the vacations, the status, they no longer brought me any joy. Everything that once seemed so important now felt like dust. The next morning, I woke up with the chilling certainty that something had fundamentally broken inside me. The world outside my window was the same, but I was different. I knew I could not go on like this, but I could not see a way out. The choice had been made, and now I had to live with the consequences. But how long could I pretend that everything was okay? The question hung in the air, and I had no answer. The breaking point did not come with a bang, but with the quiet, gentle click of a door. It was a Saturday morning, a few days later. The air was crisp with the promise of a New England autumn, and sunlight streamed through the large bay window in our kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Chris was making pancakes the way he did every weekend. Ethan was at the table, meticulously arranging blueberries into a smiley face on his plate. The smell of batter and maple syrup filled the house. It was a scene of such perfect, domestic bliss that it felt like a physical assault. Chris flipped a pancake, his movements easy and familiar. He caught my eye and smiled, a genuine, loving smile that did not reach the deep weariness I knew was behind his eyes. "Hey, I was thinking," he said, his voice light, "we should finally take that trip up to Stowe next weekend. See the leaves change. Ethan would love it." And that was it. That simple, beautiful suggestion. The thought of taking this lie, this rotten thing festering inside me, into the pure, clean air of the Vermont mountains was unbearable. To watch Ethan laugh, to hold Chris's hand, all while carrying the ghost of Daniel in a hotel room, I could not do it. The performance was over. The mask was cracking. I waited until Ethan was absorbed in a cartoon in the living room. Chris was at the sink, rinsing the dishes. The sound of the running water was the only noise besides the frantic drumming of my own heart. "Chris," I said. My voice was a stranger's, thin and brittle. He turned, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Yeah, honey?" The words would not come. I opened my mouth, but only a choked sound emerged. I saw the concern flash across his face as he closed the distance between us. "Grace? What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have to tell you something," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the polished granite of the countertop, "and it's going to destroy everything." He was silent for a moment, his posture shifting from concern to a tense, guarded stillness. "Okay," he said slowly. "Talk to me." And so I did. The story came out in a torrent of broken sentences and ragged breaths. I told him about the debts, the foreclosure notice ID hidden from him, the desperation. I told him about my friend S suggestion, the call, the diner, and then the hotel. I did not spare myself. I laid the ugly, sordid truth out on the pristine surface of our perfect life. As I spoke, I watched every trace of warmth and love drain from his face. It was like watching a statue being carved from ice. His expression went from confusion to disbelief, then to a dawning, sickening comprehension. When I finally fell silent, the only sound was the cheerful, oblivious theme song of Ethan's cartoon from the other room. He did not yell. He did not scream. The quiet was so much worse. He simply stared at me, his eyes dark with a pain so profound I could not bear to look at it. "Daniel?" he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Daniel from the club? The one who bought that tech startup last year?" I could only nod, tears streaming down my face now. He let out a single, harsh laugh that held no humor. Of course it was him. He backed away from me, putting the kitchen island between us as if I were contaminated. "You let that man. You sold yourself to save this? To save the house? The cars? The trips we could not afford?" "I was scared, Chris," I sobbed. "I was going to lose everything." "You did lose everything," he said, his voice like stone. "You just did it right now." He stood there for a long moment, his jaw clenched. I could see the 14 years of our life together. Our wedding, the day Ethan was born, the barbecues in the backyard, flickering and dying in his eyes. "I want you to go upstairs," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Pack a bag. Just the essentials." "Chris, please." "Now, Grace," he commanded, and the finality in his tone was absolute. "I am going to take Ethan to the park. I do not want you here when we get back. I'll have my lawyer contact you on Monday to arrange for you to get the rest of your things. We'll figure out Ethan later. For now, you just need to leave." There was no negotiation. There was no room for pleas or forgiveness. I had detonated a bomb in the center of our family, and he was simply dealing with the fallout, protecting the only thing that was left to protect, our son. Numbly, I went upstairs. I moved through our beautiful bedroom, the room we had shared for a decade, and packed a small suitcase. I did not take the expensive clothes or the jewelry. I took jeans, a few sweaters, my toothbrush, things a stranger would own. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of Ethan's room, looking at his neatly made bed and the Legos scattered on the floor. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it impossible to breathe. I had done this, in my desperate attempt to keep our perfect world from falling apart. I had shattered it myself. I drove away from the house, from the perfectly manicured lawn and the life I no longer had a right to. I pulled over a few blocks away, my hands shaking too hard to grip the steering wheel. I took out my phone and found Daniel's number. He answered on the second ring. "Grace," he said, his voice smooth and unsurprised. "It's over," I said, my own voice hollow. "He knows." I told him everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I do not know what I expected. Shock? Concern? But all I heard was a faint, dismissive sigh. "Well," Daniel said, his tone as casual as if I'd just told him it might rain. "That's unfortunate. I trust you understand our arrangement is terminated. The remaining debt is, of course, due in full. I'll have my office send over the paperwork." And then he hung up. For him, it was over. A transaction completed, a file closed. I was just a line item on a balance sheet. 3 months later, I was living in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a featureless complex in Stamford. The divorce proceedings were underway, cold and clinical. I saw Ethan on Wednesdays and every other weekend, supervised. The meetings were held in parks and diners, neutral territory filled with the ghosts of what we used to be. Chris was civil but distant. He looked at me like a business associate he was forced to deal with, the history between us erased. The house was sold. The cars were gone. My old friends had evaporated, their loyalties lying with the life I had destroyed. My world had been reduced to the four walls of my apartment and the hourly wage I earned working retail at a department store in the mall. One evening, after dropping Ethan back at the quiet, empty shell of our old life, I stood in front of the cheap bathroom mirror in my new apartment. The woman staring back was tired. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there before. She was stripped of her designer clothes, her social status, her family. She was alone. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not a liar. The reflection was honest. The life was real. The price for that honesty had been everything I ever thought I wanted. And as I stared at the stranger in the mirror, I finally recognized myself. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.